Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to the All Me podcast. This is your host, Tavis Piatoli, sports dietitian for the Taylor Hooten Foundation. Have you ever wondered what the life is like for a scientist, especially those who test athletes for various measures of performance? Furthermore, what steps do you need to take to get to that level? Whether it's testing an NFL player's sweat to see if they have enough electrolytes, or trying to determine the correct carbohydrate solution to refuel an NBA player after an exhaustive first half, those are the types of studies conducted at the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, also known as the GSSI. In this podcast, Dr. Rebecca Randell, Bridget Sopeña and I discuss their path towards being a scientist at the GSSI, the educational direction they took, and the challenges they faced along the way. We'll also dive into the significance of a mentorship-mentee relationship and why it played a critical role in their development as scientists. Dr. Randell is an associate principal scientist at GSSI and visiting fellow at Loughborough University in the UK. She earned her bachelor's degree and her PhD from the University of Birmingham, UK, under the supervision of Professor Asger Junkerdrop. Rebecca has been at GSSI for 9 years, where she has managed and supported GSSI service and education engagements in Latin America, Asia, and Europe. Currently, Rebecca is working in the sports science applications. In addition, Rebecca has extensive experience working with elite athletes in clubs such as FC Barcelona, Manchester City FC, and PV Sindhu. She continues to author publications in peer-reviewed journals and deliver invited presentations in the UK and abroad. Bridget is a senior scientist who has been with the Gatorade Sports Science Institute since 2014 and is stationed at the headquarter lab in Barrington, Illinois. Her main responsibilities include leading US and Canada GSSI athlete service programs and has spearheaded GSSI's Elite Recovery Program. As an athlete service lead, she evaluates elite athletes in their field of play and educates them or their respective practitioners on their individual physiological, hydration, and sports nutrition needs. Within the recovery program, she has done extensive research on athlete monitoring solutions and has championed salivary analysis as a novel athlete assessment. She has extensive experience working with the elite team, sports practitioners, and athletes within the NBA, NFL, MLB, and NWSL. We'd also like to thank our partners at Gatorade for sponsoring this podcast.
Rebecca and Bridget, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor to have scientists from the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. Thanks for coming.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Tavis.
This is going to be a really fun topic. Student to scientist, like what's that process? We have a lot of great questions. I'm looking forward to kind of learning about this process because, you know, I get a lot of these questions from just students in general, internships, and just when you go out and speak in public. So I know this is going to provide a lot of people that, hey, how do I get to this path? And really it kind of leads to our first question is, let's talk about your career paths and specifically, when did you discover an interest in the field of sports nutrition and exercise science? Rebecca, let's start with you first.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I've always been like a sporty child, and growing up, I always had an interest in sport. And so when it came to the time of choosing what university I wanted to go to and what I wanted to study, sport and exercise sciences like really just resonated with me. So started my degree in that. And as I was doing like my different modules, I just felt really inspired by my lecturers that taught the sports nutrition module. And at the end of the 3 years, I just was like not ready to give it up. And I know we'll come into this a bit later, but I continued down that career path and got to the place where I am now.
Excellent. Bridget, what about you?
So I have a little different path than Becca. I received my bachelor's in exercise science and my master's in clinical exercise science. And I also grew up playing sports my whole life. I was a college athlete as well. So I didn't exactly know, though, at the beginning of college that I wanted to do exercise science. I actually originally started taking sports management courses because I knew I wanted to be in sports in some capacity. I knew it. Then actually I got injured as a college soccer player, and I spent a lot of time with my sports performance staff trying to rehab my injury. And I really enjoyed it, and I was like personally intrigued. And so actually the next semester, that might have been my sophomore year, I switched my major and started taking exercise science courses, and the rest is history.
Awesome. Mine's completely different. Like, I had to fail at something in order to figure out where I wanted to go. It's like, nope, you're not going to be a pediatrician because your first GPA at LSU as a freshman was 1.8. And it's like, you can't combine partying and pre-med. It's not a good combination. And then I'm flipping through a curriculum book because I got threatened by my mom that you're done if you don't, if you don't get off of academic probation, you're done. So I found the word sports nutrition. I'm like, that's cool. I lost a bunch of weight. I played sports. I love sports. Wow, let's figure this out. You walk into a class and there's like 100 girls, 3 guys. I'm like, this has got to be the wrong place. But nope, it was. And all of a sudden, 5 years later, got the degree. And here we are today, 20 years later, interviewing y'all on this topic. So it's always fun to hear where people get to where they are. Now, when someone chooses a career in sports nutrition and exercise science, they usually have an athletic background. Bridget, I saw you play D1 soccer. You just mentioned that. Do you feel this really influenced? You mentioned your injury, but did this kind of have a little bit of a push on heading you into this path of exercise science?
Oh, yeah. My soccer career absolutely influenced my decision to go into sports science. When you're a collegiate athlete, sometimes it's hard to completely transition away from that athletic lifestyle, being in the field every day and then transitioning into the real world. It's really like such a big part of your life. It's like your job when you're in college is being a collegiate athlete. So when I started taking these courses and I was nearing graduation, I just knew like that is the avenue that I wanted to stay in. I needed to still be involved and somehow be able to still be in the field somehow. Like I felt at home with that. And so the opportunity with GSSI was kind of just like a no-brainer. And it made transition into the real world, I feel like, a lot easier for me because it was like a comfort level or a comfort thing for me being on an athlete's turf and still being involved in sports in such like a high capacity.
I hear a lot of people just in conversation about just criticizing the college athlete, thinking their life is so easy. Oh, they're on scholarship. They get free college and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, and then I say, I've worked in college sports. I was not a college athlete, but I know what college athletes go through. It's the rigor of practice, strength and conditioning, trying to eat well, then trying to study and go to class and do all of that. Whereas, yeah, there are non-athletes that have very tough schedules and lives, no doubt. But when you add those 4 to 5 other hours you have to dedicate truly to your sport, that takes away from the actual student athlete component, it makes it a lot more difficult than what people think. It's not like you're just going to the gym and working out for 60 minutes. You have a lot of time to dedicate to stuff.
Absolutely. It is, like I said, it's like a job. It is your job in college, and it takes a lot of the social aspect of college for you. And I feel like it's a totally different college experience than those who aren't a collegiate athlete would experience. Not necessarily in a bad way. I just think it's different. I think you can't fully understand, like you said, the rigor of it unless you are actually a college athlete or you are on the performance staff working in college athletics. Then you get it because that's pretty demanding as well. But absolutely, it shapes you, honestly.
Absolutely, yeah. It's you're either gonna be tough and you're gonna get through it, or something's gonna happen and you might feel like, all right, maybe this is not for me.
Yeah, it did help me with my time management skills, though. You don't really have a choice, but when you have literally 1 hour in the day that you have to get stuff done because you have weightlifting in the morning, then you have your study tables, then you have practice in the afternoon, or you're traveling that weekend, like you have to get your stuff done. You don't have really a choice, and you have to maintain good grades too in order to play. So I think it was a good experience for me, for sure.
And then you got to figure out when can you sleep, eat, and have a social life.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the one thing that always gets chopped, the sleep, isn't it?
Now, Rebecca, I saw you're an avid runner. You love to run. I noticed that in your bio. Did this influence any decision for you to choose the interest in the field that you're in now?
Well, I grew up in a family of runners. My mum and dad were both very good runners, and I spent a lot of my childhood standing on the line in a cold city in England, clapping my mum and dad. And at that point, I really did not like running because that was all I knew of it. But as I got older, I did find a passion for running, but I also played a lot of netball when I was growing up, which is not a popular sport in the US, I'm aware. But yes, I played a lot of netball, and then as I kind of got older, I then went more into running. And I think this year I have really found my love for running, and I've had that love for running actually for quite a while, and it did spark my interest in wanting to do more for athletes. I mean, I was never going to be a professional runner. I was never going to really run to a very high standard. But I think having an understanding of what running is like really helps you to work with athletes, because then you can, you know what they're going through, and you know kind of what it takes to run and how it feels, and then you can offer that extra bit of support and advice. So yeah, I don't know if it's really sparked my interest in the field. I think I've just always loved any sport. I love watching soccer. I like watching rugby, lots of different sports. But yeah, I think just being a sporty person in general sparked my interest in the field.
Yeah, it's just fun to be competitive, right? And even it doesn't matter how old you are. Like, I still play every Thursday night. My wife and I play softball, co-ed softball league. It's fun. It's competitive. It's not, it's not like we take it serious. If we win, we win. If we don't, we just love doing something active. Like, oh, wow, I played sports in high school. I played baseball, but this is the closest I'm going to get to competing again at this level. And it's just, it keeps your engine running, right? It keeps that engine running.
Everyone always says that to me when I play sport. They're like, you're so competitive. And I'm the same. Like, I can take it if I lose. I do like it if I win. But I think that competitiveness has helped me in my career. I mean, I wouldn't stand on people's toes to get anywhere above them, but it gives me that motivation and passion. I want to do well for myself.
I think that does like fire our team up, because almost everyone, I'd say 95% of the people on the GSSI team come from some sporting background or just avid sports fans, and we have just, I think, that natural competitiveness. So like all of us, and as scientists, it's just competing with ourselves too.
Yeah.
You just want to like one up, and like you just want to keep striving to do better and better and better. And I just think that's like the natural athlete in all of us, and that's what's gotten us to where we are, quite honestly.
That's an important part of the growth process. I mean, you just can't be if everybody in that, and I know it's a little bit off topic, but I love it, because if everybody in that room or everybody on that science team had the same mindset, the same thoughts, the same goals, it'd be a pretty boring place to work, right? The fact that you guys think differently, you compete, and it's healthy competition. There's dangerous competition where you're like out to hurt and really demoralize the person. Like, I like to compete with my daughter. She's 10. She plays volleyball, softball, and we'll do some things at the end. Like we'll set up a bucket and we have to toss the softball after practice and see who gets the most. And she's like, "Do you ever let me win?" I'm like, and sometimes I do, but most times it's a teaching moment that, look, it's to keep you competing. It's to keep you to get better. And I know we'll talk about some of the things that you guys do at GSSI to maybe challenge each other from the research side. Now, y'all both have advanced degrees, and I'm going to do something a little different than what's on kind of the agenda. Bridget, I want to focus on you first, because Rebecca, I'm going to come back and really focus on your PhD in a second. Y'all both have advanced degrees in the field. Let's talk about the process of what that takes to get that advanced degree. Bridget, your master's is in clinical exercise science. Can you kind of provide our listeners more about your path?
Sure. I will say that like every path in exercise science can be different, even if I have the same degree as someone else. Our coursework could look a little different, but yeah, I have my master's in clinical exercise science. I actually considered, when I was in my master's degree, focusing more on the clinical side. I considered becoming like a sports PT or an athletic trainer at some point. And the clinical aspect of my degree helped me like in the research setting of GSSI, but it wasn't necessarily where my passion lied. My coursework had more clinical courses like EKG courses, specifically, and internships. I had internships at local hospitals working in cardiac rehab as well. So it was more of a well-rounded look into different populations in exercise, not just a sports-specific avenue. There are some, and I think maybe Becca's was more sports-specific, her higher degree, focusing solely on athletes, but mine was kind of I got to dip my toes into different populations. So not only the athletes, like when we were doing our research work, my research was specifically focusing on athletes and specifically female athletes, body image and body composition. But I also got to kind of experience different experiences with different populations, like the older population. And that actually helped me figure out that wasn't really the population that I wanted to work with. And I really honed in on wanting to work with athletes.
You mentioned the EKG and clinical exercise science. Any specific courses that really stood out that you feel like this really helped me get to where I am now?
Yeah, honestly, any of the courses that allowed me to do hands-on work were really the courses that I felt like provided the most value to me. So specifically, one of the courses was exercise testing and prescription. That one was divided into like half coursework and half working in our human performance lab, learning these different assessments, learning how to actually work with a person, talking to them, talking to the different people, and really having specific recommendations following the assessments that you did and how each person is different. I feel like I've really taken that and used that in GSSI. Also really enjoyed my research methods class. I just mentioned that, but that allowed me to work more closely with female athletes, looking into their body image and body composition. That was a personal interest of mine when I was a female athlete. I focused with some body image issues, so I wanted to look into that a little further into the research and see, like, objectively, am I the only one that feels this way? Like, do other people feel this way? Is there something we can do about that? And then also my graduate assistantship, not necessarily coursework, but it was my assistantship that I had in grad school, managing our human performance lab. I think I learned probably the most there. And that wasn't even technically, that was on the job training, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, I learned so much in that, working. Not only was I teaching undergrad students how to do these assessments, which helps me learn more too. It helps me with my communication, with my people skills, with learning the ins and outs of these different assessments even more than I thought I already knew. I would say that was actually probably the most value that I had from my coursework, was that assistantship.
Awesome. Yeah, you can't really go wrong with practical hands-on experience. That's where you can read as many books as you want, and you can be the smartest person from, hey, I can memorize this. But when you get that hands-on experience in real life, work, then it's hard to beat that. Yeah,
and that's how I learn. I will soak it in more if I'm actually doing it with my hands or seeing it versus listening to it. Yeah, and I totally agree.
All right, Rebecca, let's talk about, your pursuit of your PhD. Obviously, you have your PhD. I know there's a lot of students, even myself, like I've thought about it, and even teaching grad school, it's like, wow, it'd really be cool to get a PhD. But then I'm like, it might take really a long process, right? Do I have the time? So what's the length? How long does this process take, and what's involved?
Yeah, and similar to how Bridget started, is that I think everyone's path into a PhD and how long it takes each person can be very different. So obviously this is just an explanation of my kind of path through my PhD, but I actually applied for a PhD in 2009, I think it was. And I applied, wasn't that confident, but I went for it and I didn't get it. And I was like, I guess, a little bit of failure. I was like, what have I done? Like, why couldn't I do this PhD? And, it makes you take a step back and reflect, and was just fortunate that at the same time, the university that I was at, the University of Birmingham, they were offering an MPhil place for an 18-month MPhil to look at the effects of green tea supplementation on fat burning or fat oxidation during exercise. So I was offered that as a kind of second, after not getting the PhD, was offered this instead and took it. And, I didn't get what I wanted, but I thought this could be a stepping stone into getting my PhD. So yeah, I started my first study. It was sponsored by a green tea company because they wanted to put a claim on a product to say that it increased fat oxidation and fat burning. And then as I started to do it, my supervisor was Professor Asker Ukendrup, and he said to me, if you want to stay and do your PhD, just make yourself as valuable as you can to this department so that they don't want you to go after 18 months. And I was like, okay, like what can I do? Like, how can I make myself valuable? And there was just one piece of equipment that was in the biochemistry lab. And I thought, I'm just going to learn it and be that go-to person so that whenever anybody wants to use it, they would have to come to me. And that happened, and I took that proactive step to do that. And subsequently, the university offered to convert my MPhil into a PhD. So I was just able to stay another 18 months. And over that time, I think I did 3 or 4 studies that then made up my thesis. So yeah, for me, it took, I think it took 3 years doing studies, and then I took a year afterwards to write up, but I also worked at GSSI at the same time. So yeah, it's a 4-year process.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, it's the process for everyone's a little different what's going on. I remember when I was pursuing my master's, I was working full time. So what should have been a 2-year process or 3-year turned into a 5-year process. It's like, what? But at the same time, it's a little bit different for everybody. Now, one of the questions I'm sure a lot of people have is some people pursue their PhD just to have it and say, hey, I'm a doctor, right? And they might not even use it in their job, but what would be a few reasons that could help someone decide if they really should pursue it?
I think I learned more than anything throughout my PhD, and it doesn't necessarily mean the technical things of what I learned. Yes, I do use them, and I have used them after my PhD. But to Bridget's point as well, like everything around organization, you are independent. You have to do everything yourself. You're not spoon-fed the information. You have to go out and learn it. And so being organized and independent, they were skills that I then picked up. Resilience, things went wrong all the time, and you have to acknowledge what you've done that hasn't gone quite right, pick yourself up and go again. It's all down to you. I mean, there are other people around, but you're leading that project. And so I would say that doing a PhD, yes, it teaches you that technical skill. It really focuses your area of research and your interest, but you learn so much more than just that.
Were there any times like early on, maybe midway through, you're like, oh, why did I do this?
Yeah.
Or you're like, no, it's good, but I'm sure there were some tough times as well.
Yeah, well, my studies, they started at 6 a.m. in the morning, while our participants would come in at 6 a.m. because we needed them fasted, and then we had to get them to sit for 2 hours so the green tea got into their circulation before they could exercise. So our participants were there at 6, which meant that, we had to get there 5:30, 5:45 on a bad day, and also get yourself ready for the whole day ahead of you. So yeah, and we'd do that 7 days a week. I was talking to someone the other day, I can't believe I got up at that time 7 days a week to go and sit in a lab and test people, but we did it. And there was other PhD students in the lab with us, and we were a team, like we were all in it together. But yeah, there were, I guess, multiple times that I probably did regret it.
I feel like any higher degree, there were probably tears shed at some point
Yeah.
for any person getting a master's degree or a PhD. That's just a given. You're like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? So
I remember having like subjects in the lab, and I was like, someone would be looking after them, but I would go out and just have a couple of, a few tears.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Pick yourself up, let's go again.
That's just a given. That's going to happen.
So I had that process with my master's, because working full time, trying to conduct the thesis. And then I took a job full time about an hour and a half away from the university. So, my major professor was like, look, you're getting to the point where if you don't finish the classes you started with, are going to fall off because you have a 5-year window and you're going to have to retake them. So the stress level and, the money and things like that. And all of a sudden we finally got it done. And it's like the monkey jumped off my back and I'm like, whoo, this is, so I'm sure there were highlights during your process and challenges. Any like one or two things you say, like this really stood out, this was awesome. And what about on the opposite side, some really struggles that you may have experienced during that process, Rebecca?
Yeah, I have a lot of highlights, and I do put these down to my supervisor, who was very keen for us as a group, as a research group, to travel and to network and to give us new experiences. And I don't know how well this went down with my colleagues when I was doing my PhD, but 2 months into it, my supervisor said to me, "Oh, do you want to go to Hawaii to do some testing with the Ironmen at the World Championships?" And I was like, yes, of course I do. So like 2 months into that, I was on a plane to Hawaii, and I'd done a different research study with the athletes out there. And so, yeah, that was the best experience that I could have been given. And there's also like smaller highlights, like finishing a research study, seeing your data come in and looking at it and deciding or like analyzing like what's happened. They are all highlights that you go through when you do a PhD, and would never have not done it now. Like looking back, yes, there were some challenges, but there was a lot of highlights, and like the challenges I think were the things that we've just discussed. Having subjects that then drop out, and you've invested hours and hours into these people. You've texted them every day to remind them to take a supplement. You've given them their diets, and then all of a sudden they say, "Oh, I can't come into the lab anymore." It takes like a tiny little bit of your soul away, but yeah, in total, the highlights outweigh the challenges.
And then finally, what was your dissertation topic on?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier on, but it was looking at green tea supplementation on fat burning, but giving the supplement in lots of different forms, lots of different durations. And then also, I'd say this to anybody that is doing a PhD, help out on other projects. I was able to do some protein synthesis work with some other colleagues that were in the lab, so was able to get experience in that as well.
Yep, I agree with that. Even as an undergrad, I hopped on to other master's level research projects just to get experience on different topics, and it helps you to figure out what you want to do too, if you are seeing what other people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's really cool to see.
Figure out what you want and what you don't want to do.
Exactly.
Which is just important.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's always fun when you look at like, I'm a big fan of like omega-3, so I love looking at omega-3 research, and some new work that just came out about traumatic brain injury, again, a follow-up study. And then you just see all the collaboration on there where it might be 4 or 5 or 6 different universities working together to really achieve the same outcome. So it's great to see, all of that involved in that process. When you guys have completed the education process, let's talk about the next steps when it comes to working as a scientist. Because I'm sure you don't just like, I'm a scientist now, let's start working for a company, right? There's a process. Bridget, I'll start with you first. Do you need to complete any post-grad work or work under other scientists, like an intern or any other prerequisites before you start working as a scientist for a company?
Not necessarily. Me personally, I did. I actually started as an intern with GSSI, and I felt like that really helped me. I actually took on the role, like as a temporary role. It was a 3-month internship directly. Actually, I was still finishing some of my master's work while I did that, but I kind of took it because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. And I would have rather taken a really good internship opportunity versus just jumping into a full-time role somewhere else. Because like my other internships in grad school and undergrad, it helped me to narrow down what I didn't want to do. So I was like, okay, 3-month internship, this sounds amazing. This mixes my interest for research, athletes, like this is a no-brainer. This sounds great. Let's do it. So I applied, interviewed, and started that internship. But then at the end of the internship, I was like, wait, I don't want to leave here. I really enjoyed this. Can I stay? Do I have to go? And so they actually extended my so an intern. I was technically a contractor. They extended my contract another year, and then which eventually opened up an opportunity for a full-time role within GSSI, which I interviewed for, and the rest is history. Obviously, I'm still here. But yeah, I really encourage starting with internships and those types of things, because I feel like if you start and you're not 100% sure what you want to do, then you feel like you're maybe trapped in that career. You can't quit a full-time job. And this was a temporary position that allowed me to get paid. And I know that was a luxury. Not all internships are paid. Most internships aren't paid. And so I was really blessed to be able to have a paid internship to get experience. But honestly, I really encourage students to take internships, and don't be too prideful to take an internship when you have a higher degree. I think that can be, when I saw a lot of my friends graduating and taking full-time roles, I felt like a little, I don't want to say embarrassed. I was working for GSSI, but I was an intern still. I had my master's degree and I was an intern. But I was like, this is going to pay off. I'm getting this invaluable experience. I don't really care about the title right now. I'm getting invaluable experience, and this is going to help guide me to be really just happy in my career long term. You have to think about the long-term benefit of it. But sorry, I think I got off topic. To answer your question, no, you don't necessarily have to start with an internship or post-grad work to start as a scientist. We have some people on our team that came directly from a bachelor's degree. And so it just depends on what your experiences were, honestly, and the openings within the company.
Rebecca, anything you want to comment there?
Yeah, around internships and in sport, and you can probably tell I'm not from the US, but
I thought you were from New York.
No, Becca.
I'm kidding.
I know what gave it away. But, in the UK, there's not many paid internships in sport, and I think it's criminal, because I think that's one thing that GSSI does really well, in that we always pay our interns to work with us. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do, and to Bridget's point, and I think if you're a student doing your bachelor's or your master's, you can grow a network throughout that time for free, and you can get experience for free. And that could be shadowing a PhD student in the lab and just seeing if research is something that you want to do, or it could be shadowing a sports dietitian at one of the clubs or teams at the university. And all of those things you can put on your CV, and they are really important to have, and they will make you stand out from the rest.
Yes. I mean, students reach out and ask questions, a lot about, hey, what do I need to do to become this and that? And that internship, that volunteer, that practical hands-on experience, as y'all mentioned, is so invaluable. For me, I would not be here today as a dietitian and working in sports, or have had the opportunity to work in sports, if I didn't volunteer or get experience. I didn't have the GPA to get a dietetic internship back then. So I went to a hospital that I knew had an internship. They actually had a free internship, but you still had to apply, and it was a rigorous process to get accepted. And I volunteered 40 hours a week that summer. To show them, hey, look, I have the work ethic. My grades were not where they needed to be. And I got a call back the next year, and they said, look, your application was great. We know who you are. You didn't match this year. And I went to grad school, and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? Let me go to grad school. Somebody else in dietetics did. So I'll go get a master's in exercise science. And then I just got a call that summer and said, hey, we got 2 spots for, one's yours if you want it. And I was like, wow, okay. Didn't even apply. And the rest was history. So you're right, that people will look and see that valuable work that you're doing, and it's going to pay off. You don't know when. That's the scary part, right?
And making a good impression as well, and showing that you're keen and interested. For me, like, I always remember those people, and then if something comes up, they will be who I will go to first, because I remember them.
Yeah. And Becca made a good point. It's like, don't waste your undergrad or grad school time. Like, if you have a summer where you're taking only 1 or 2 classes, like, it's a grind, but go do some observations, take an internship if you can. Like, don't waste that valuable time, and have those extra experiences. Like, although I interned with GSSI and was paid, before that, I had 2 or 3 unpaid internships that allowed me to have experience the day I graduated, which helped me to get the internship as well.
Now, as a scientist, is there a point like prior to, like, let's say getting your own study, but is there a point where you say, I'm ready to take the reins to begin designing that study? And where does that, like, just like anything, I'm sure at one point you feel like, I'm ready to do this. How does that work? Rebecca, you want to go ahead and start?
I don't think there is a point where you feel like that.
Yeah.
From my perspective, no, I don't. I think every time I've been in that situation, it's a little bit unnerving and it's a little bit unsettling. But if you've got a team around you that will help and support you, that will obviously help. But also it's good to step out of your comfort zone and actually not a little bit of failure or doing something a little bit wrong isn't a bad thing, because you learn from it and then you know how to do it the next time. So I don't know if I could ever say there is a point where you're really ready to take the reins and begin designing. Even now I'm like, am I doing this right?
I was gonna say the same thing. I've been with GSSI for 7.5 years now, and like I feel like I always need and like encourage support. I feel like especially scientists, there's that, what's it called, the Dunning-Kruger effect, is where like the more experience you have, you feel like the less that you know, because the further you dive into a topic, you're like, oh my gosh, like there's just so much out here. But obviously as your experience grows, so does your
confidence.
Yeah, your confidence grows too. But it's just, it's hard. Like I don't feel like there's been a specific, it's not like at 3 years I felt like I was ready to just take on everything by myself. It depends on the project.
Yeah.
And
when you're around people who are also just super intelligent and clever, you're always like, wow, like I don't feel like I know anything because these people know loads more than me.
Yes, our team has a lot of very, very, very smart people who challenge you, and they've helped me grow so much. But it's also like, dang.
I think I've heard that. It's
very
like
smart.
You hear that all the time. Surround yourself with people smarter than you, and then you're gonna have success. All right, let's talk about the process at GSSI. Right, do you conduct individual research, or do y'all work as a team for the most part? And Rebecca, I'll start with you.
Yeah, a bit of both. I mean, we're all one big team at the end of the day, but we all work on maybe individual projects, but we pull in expertise and help from others. So one of the projects that actually Bridget and I have both been working on is just looking at the science in women and what's available in terms of physical performance and what nutrition interventions could help women. And so, that's something that we're doing as a team together, although one person will lead it. So yeah, there's a mixture of both.
Excellent. Let's talk about the enjoyable aspects of your job. What do you feel you love the most about what you're doing right now? Bridget, let's start with you.
I really love, and I think I mentioned this earlier, I really love working with athletes in their field. That's where I feel most at home. I feel confident and comfortable, and I just really I feel like I can relate to them. And with GSSI, we have the opportunity to work with a variety of elite athletes, and I know that's a rare opportunity. And so I'm really blessed to be able to do that.
Rebecca, is there anything specific that, I know we've kind of talked about a variety of things, but anything that stands out for you about your job now that you're like, I really just love doing this?
One of the things I've loved in the past is working with our international consultants. For me, learning new cultures and traveling to new countries is a big passion of mine, and I really loved learning from them. So yeah, that was one of the most enjoyable. I've stepped away from doing that as much now, but it was one of the most enjoyable things that I've done to teach them, to see what they do in their countries, and to know actually gave me a really good understanding in that, what we do in the UK or what we do in the US sometimes just doesn't resonate in those countries. So you have to adapt your way of thinking and your way of communicating. So yeah, that would be one of the most enjoyable things that I've done.
Yeah, I think our field is so unique in the fact that there's a lot of versatility. There's a lot of variety. And I think that's important in the field of science. Is it's never the same thing over and over, right? It could be a high school athlete, a college athlete, a pro athlete. Then it's a different sport, different energy system. And it's like, wow, there's so many things you can study. You would think you'd run out of like research topics, but nope. Here's another topic. And there's always something new that we can challenge ourselves with. Now, we've talked about the positives, right? So without being too honest, are there just some components of your job that can be stressful and very challenging? And Bridget, I'll start with you.
Man.
She looked really eager to answer that one.
I think a challenge specifically for our job is sometimes we can't research whatever we want. There has to be sometimes focused around a business rationale, which can be hard when you're working in a sports nutrition company. Sometimes you have to target your research studies. Yep. So that can be challenging when you want to do something that might not fit a business rationale, but there's still a lot of opportunities that we have and different research studies that we can do. But sometimes it just narrows the focus a little more than what you would want.
Sure. Rebecca, anything different on your end?
I'm happy to tackle the stressful side if you want. Yes, it can be stressful. And actually, working with athletes at times can be a little stressful because it's a really high-pressured environment and you're a stranger or an external person that's coming into the home or the team's home. And so, you're a bit on edge. And I remember I've been in situations before, like testing athletes, and they're all shouting at each other, and it's like all hot in the room. And they started putting music on, and I'm like, just give me a break. But you can't say that. It's like, okay, just keep being professional. So yeah, I think they're fun stresses, and you can laugh about them afterwards.
Rebecca, you mentioned earlier when you were doing your PhD, you were starting 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Let's talk about typical working hours now. I know with COVID, that's changed a lot of things, people working at home and all that stuff, but what's the typical workday look like now for y'all?
Yes, it's a good question because it has changed since COVID. And one thing that our company has been really great to do over the last 18 months is focus on flexible working time and giving us like times to focus and giving us the space to maybe have an hour to do something away from work. So one of the things that I really focused on in the last 18 months, 2 years is that work-life balance. So I think, I do often do maybe an 8:30 till 5:30 day. And there's sometimes where I have to jump on a call later in the day with the time difference of me being in England and the rest of the team being in the US. But I think it's really important to give yourself some time. Obviously, when we do service trips with athletes, those days can be pretty full on.
We're just starting our day here in the U.S. Like, Bridget and I are just getting started. You're about to end your Friday and go have some fun.
Yeah, it's really the weekend for me.
Bridget, what's your day typically like?
Honestly, it's really similar to Becca, just obviously different time zones. Yeah, usually it's a pretty standard working schedule, but PepsiCo allows the flexible working schedule if needed, especially since COVID and working from home. They understand the challenges are a little unique right now. We are still working from home, but when we're traveling, going to athletes' field to play, that we kind of base our schedule off of their team schedule. So we have to be more flexible there, and it might be a 5 a.m. start, or it might be a 6 p.m. practice or game. So that's a little different than like our normal working schedule. But when we're not traveling and we're just doing, the desk work, it is just like, I would say like a 9 to 5, pretty typical schedule, working around what works best for you though.
All right. We've talked a lot about the student part and where you guys have been and where how have you gotten to where you are. Let's talk about the science part, or really the scientist part. What are some good characteristics to become a good scientist? Rebecca, I'll start with you.
I think being open-minded to ask questions. I think there's often been that culture of being scared to be inquisitive and ask questions, but I think that's a really important way to learn. For me personally, I think being humble is a good trait to have, and to know that you're not going to know the answers to everything. So, learn from others, and that will make you a better scientist.
Anything you want to add, Bridget, on your side?
I totally echo what Becca said, but yeah, just being flexible is really big, and good communication. I think that is a really big thing. And I know it's something that I've worked on while I've been a scientist, is being able to communicate with different populations, being able to communicate scientist to scientist, being able to communicate scientist to practitioner, or scientist to athlete, or scientist, like when I worked in a hospital, scientist to patient. Like, it's just, you have to be able to have the variety of different communication methods. So I feel like that's really important.
Sorry, Bridget.
No, it's okay.
I think one thing that we also have to tackle in our role is that we often have to speak to the Gatorade brand, who aren't scientists. So then we have to change our communication style then as well.
Yep, absolutely.
I know one of the things with being a scientist is having that creative mindset, right? Coming up with ideas, things that you feel that are going to advance the field. Do y'all have the ability to propose new study ideas, like to leadership when wanting to research a specific topic that may be unique? And Bridget, I'll start with you.
Yeah, we definitely do. I feel like all of our team has a voice, and we're able to propose those studies. And of course, not all studies are like, they're going to be like, oh yes, for sure, we're going to do that. But you definitely have the freedom, and they encourage you to voice your ideas. And yeah, I don't feel like you need to be in a higher up position to have that voice and express those potential studies.
Right.
That's one thing that they've really pushed us to do over the last few years, is to really voice our opinions and not to be scared of doing it. And I think also, if you're in, like Bridget mentioned earlier, that we are sometimes restricted in like the things that we can research because it has to have a business impact. But if you've got a network or know someone at a different university, you could maybe collaborate with them on something that they're working on. So you're still kind of got your hand in an area that you're interested in.
Yep.
And we talked a little bit earlier about just internship process. Let's talk about the mentorship process, because that's an important part, is to have someone you can lean on, guide on, and just really guide you as being a professional to get where you guys have been today. Did you go through a mentorship process working with the senior level scientist? Actually,
one of my first mentors at GSSI was Becca. That was a few years ago, Becca, when we started that. So I'd been on GSSI for a couple of years at that point, but I feel like it was a more natural transition with her. It wasn't like a forced mentorship. It was just someone that I really looked up to and respected and valued their opinion. And so it was a really easy ask for me, is, hey, Becca, can we meet weekly, monthly? I don't remember the exact timeline, but can I just bounce ideas off of you? And can you help guide me in some of my decision making? And it's really just someone that's there as a sounding board for you. And I think it was really helpful for me. And I definitely encourage it for any younger scientist, or even any veteran scientist too. Yeah. I don't think you're ever too old, quote unquote old, to have a mentor, because I feel like you always, especially in the field that we're in, you're never there. Like you always have room to grow, and there's always someone that you can be learning from. And so if you can continue to find those people, it's really valuable to lean on them.
I think you can have multiple mentors as well that might tick a box for something, like where maybe you have like a personal mentor and you have a professional mentor. And I think, over time, like what Bridget and I have now is just like someone we can confide in, we can talk to, and we know that the conversation's safe and secure. And and I think it helps both of us. Bridget's there for me, and I guess that I'm there for Bridget.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. It doesn't matter where you are in your career. It's always good to have somebody to talk to when needed, and whether it's just personal reflection, personal growth. We, like you mentioned, Bridget, always room to grow, no matter what we know, how much we've been in this field. Some of the best scientists and some of the best individuals and leaders have somebody they go to. They have somebody that guide them. All right. So what advice or tips would you give to someone on how to stay connected with your mentors and mentees to ensure you maintain those relationships?
I don't think mentoring should be forced. If you're finding that the relationship or what you're getting from it isn't there, then I think that's fine. You can always find other ones. And I think it comes in like ebbs and flows. Like sometimes you might be in a period of your career or going through a particular situation where you might need your mentor a bit more. So you might, put in more regular calls. And then if that mentor and mentee relationship is truly there, like you might not speak to them for a couple of weeks or months, but then you can pick it up again and they're there when you need you. So I don't necessarily think there's a set pattern for how often or how little you need to speak to them. But on the flip side, you could put that in and, every month you have a check-in, and whether that check-in's 10 minutes, that's fine. If it's an hour and a half, that's also fine. It's just, maybe that regular contact, no matter how big or how small, can help.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe at the beginning have like a reoccurring meeting, and then as the relationship develops, you can kind of make it a more just monthly, bi-monthly, or whatever the case is.
Sorry, just to say one thing, if that's okay. Like I know, like me and Bridget are both very passionate about mentoring and inspiring women, and I do think that is still maybe needed, or I think a lot of women do appreciate a mentor, and so I just wanted to acknowledge it because it's something that like we're very passionate about.
Yeah. No, and you, Rebecca, you even mentioned this should not be a forced relationship, right? This is not something that you want somebody to feel like they have to be your mentor. And it kind of led to my next question on, once you identify someone, what's that process? You're like, oh, I want you to be my mentor, but do you have any advice on taking the next steps to ask them, right? Because it's not like, hey, will you be my mentor? I'm sure there's a process along the way.
Yeah. It could be as simple, like as meeting up with someone at a conference and saying, oh, would you mind just chatting to me? And then once you establish the next step, initially you might put some meetings in place that have a specific outcome, but I think it needs to come from the mentee. Like the mentee needs to really identify like what they want to get out of it, and then it's the mentor's job to guide them and to help them to develop in that specific area. And so you could be very structured and say, okay, this week we're going to do this, next month we're going to do this, and then as to Bridget's point, like over time, it maybe become a little bit more relaxed and just depends on the situation that you're in at the time.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of that. Becca was my mentor, of course, but I've also had some other external mentors outside of GSSI. And when I originally wanted to approach them, I'm not even sure they knew initially that like I respected them that much and I really looked up to them, and I valued their opinion and guidance enough that I would want them to be my mentor. So I drafted an email, and it was a little nerve-wracking, but I just said like, these are the things that I look up to you, and I really would appreciate some guidance, and I would love to have you as a mentor if that would be something you'd be interested in. And just asking them and telling them why you value them. I feel like the honesty, and people appreciate that. And it's being a little bit vulnerable, but I think that's necessary if you're going to want to have that mentorship and kind of that openness.
And even if, all that came from it, Bridget, was, that one call with them, that's someone in your network now. Like that's someone who knows you. They might see you again somewhere else and remember you. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a mentor that lasts your whole lifetime. Yeah. It could be a mentor that is just there for a short space of time, and then you look for someone else, or you've got that other person that will be there for a longer period. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still colleagues of mine that when I started out in this field 20 years ago, I leaned on them. I asked them, hey, how'd you do this? Basically, it would be an email here every once in a while. Just I saw this, and how'd you get to that level? And just other advice and other information was always good. And those people are now friends. Yep. When I see them at conferences, it's just like, it's almost like so good to see them and help them understand kind of where we got. All right, last question before we really get to what I call the fun part, and we'll get to that. So last thing really related to today's topic is, if you had to give yourself one piece of advice today, knowing what you know now, what would that be? Bridget, I'll start with you.
Oh goodness, that's such a big question. Probably to just not be afraid to ask questions. Like I think that is like one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give anyone, and what I would give myself, like looking back and when I was first starting out. You know, you want to think that you know everything, or you want to like come across that way when you're first starting, but it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to not know. It's okay to not know something, and you're not expected to know everything. And so just be okay not knowing something, and be okay really just asking a bunch of questions, because that's how you learn, and that's how you become a better scientist.
Love it. Yep. Great.
And that's a great point, Bridget. I did a lecture yesterday and someone asked me a question and I was like, do you know what? I actually don't know the answer. And I was like, I'm not even going to pretend that I know. Yeah. So I'd rather say to you, like, honestly, I don't know the answer, but I'll go away and I'll find out the answer for you.
Exactly.
Yeah, because people know if you're making it up. I think people.
Yeah.
I'll do the same thing at a conference. I'm like, look, that's out of my area of expertise, but we can help you find that answer somewhere. Someone's going to know that answer.
Yeah. Exactly.
Awesome. Now this was incredible information, but we're not done. This is the fun part. This is what I love. It's called our curveball round, right? It's where I'm going to ask you guys 3 questions that have nothing to do with today's topic. So it's almost like a little game show, right? My first question is always the same for every guest. I actually threw some new ones in here I've never asked any guests before, but the first one's always related to music, because I'm a music junkie. That's my hobby. I travel, and pre-COVID see concerts. And I sang in a 90s alternative cover band for about 10 years ago, before my daughter was born. So if you had the opportunity to be the lead singer in any band, who would that be? Rebecca, I'll start with you, because this should be interesting.
Okay, the first thing that comes to my mind, just because, I'm going to go Spice Girls.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew that was coming. I was waiting for that to come out of your mouth. So
which Spice Girl would you be?
I would be... I think I would be Baby Spice.
Baby Spice. Okay.
Yeah,
that's fitting. That's fitting.
So I'm guessing we're going to change genres here. Bridget, who would you?
What's yours?
Oh my gosh, this is so hard. Honestly, I would obviously not belong in this band at all, but I grew up the biggest in the same genre. I'm going to say Backstreet Boys fan. Yeah. So
wow.
So. Okay. If they need a female in there, I would jump in and help.
Sounds like y'all two should create maybe like a little GSSI pop group.
Oh, we have discussed
it's in the making.
It's in the making.
All right, question number 2. If you can invent one thing today, what would it be? Bridget, I'll go with you first.
Oh my gosh. Invent one thing?
If you can invent one thing.
Honestly, just because this is what I dealt with this morning, and it's the first thing that pops to my mind. Something that would allow my daughter, she's 16 months, to not want to jump off of her changing table when changing her.
Sounds like you have something that you can patent soon. And
yes. If anyone has any tips, feel free to contact me.
Get with an engineer.
I'll be looking for that jump off.
I'll be looking for that on QVC soon and seeing oh wow, I talked to the girl who invented that a year ago.
Yeah.
Rebecca.
And then mine was completely different. And I was going to say for us to be invisible.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. That's my next question.
Guys, superpower.
So my next question is, because I've heard this question before. If you could be invisible for one day, what would you do with that? Because mine was, I would sit in my daughter's classroom and just be like a fly on the wall. I just want to watch her and see what she's doing. It's so weird. I'm like, I see your grades. I see all this stuff. I just want to see what you're doing all day. I want to see how the kids interact. I want to go back to grammar school. So that's what I would do. So if you could be invisible for one day, what would you do with that?
Silence.
I know.
Quiet. It's
I don't really
oh my
know.
God,
that is such a hard question.
I was going to say that I would go to I don't know, I guess to a football team. Okay, I love Manchester United. I would love to just sit in the changing rooms, in the corner, and just listen to what the conversations are.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
I'm gonna echo that. Honestly, just going into a professional locker room, not to be weird or anything, because
right,
when it's PG, when it's appropriate to do so. And just listen to how they
actually
people
are chatting about, right? Let's see, if they're really angry or mad, or maybe we go in the doctor's office. We go in the doctor's office and see what they really think about their patients when they leave.
Oh, yeah. I don't want to know.
Well, ladies, this was amazing, incredible information. I love it. I mean, just valuable information that our listeners are going to really enjoy. And thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, what you guys are doing at GSSI and the GSSI team.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us, Tavis. This was great.
Absolutely. Y'all have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.